The Galactic Council had been deliberating for months. Their chambers were immense, floating in the emptiness of space, surrounded by stars that no human eye had ever fully appreciated. Every seat was filled with delegates from countless worlds, each species proud and ancient in its own way. For most of them, humanity was a curiosity strange, young, chaotic, and unpredictable. Yet they had grown too fast, learning technology, strategy, and diplomacy in a way no one expected. Finally, the Council made a decision. Humans would be declared a subordinate species. It was meant as a simple administrative classification, a note in the annals of galactic history. The vote passed with overwhelming support. There were murmurs of agreement, quiet celebrations in some quarters, and nods of relief. The Council believed that they had done what was necessary to keep order. The humans did not respond in the way anyone expected. No urgent protest, no desperate pleas, not even a single message asking for reconsideration. For a moment, the chamber waited, confused, hoping perhaps that the humans were gathering themselves, preparing a formal statement. But none came. Instead, there was silence, a silence so complete that it was almost tangible. Whispers began to spread. Some of the council members felt uneasy. Humans had always been unusual, but this calmness, this refusal to react, seemed different. They interpreted it as acceptance, perhaps even fear. But in truth, the humans were doing something entirely different. They were watching, they were listening, and they were thinking. The Terran embassy on the edge of the solar system had been quietly observing the council as well. Its representatives were calm, orderly, almost casual in their movements. They spoke little, typed fewer messages, and waited. Outside, the Earth fleet remained at its usual stations, engines humming softly, ships moving like a shadow across the dark ocean of space. To any observer, it was as if humanity had vanished, but they had not. They were simply choosing when, how, and if to respond. Weeks passed, and the Council's discomfort grew. Small failures began to occur. Human-built communication relays, which linked multiple systems across sectors, started showing irregularities. Trade routes that relied heavily on Terran engineering were delayed. Some species noticed that their medical nanotiny machines that humans had developed centuries ago were no longer receiving updates. Panic quietly seeped into parts of the chamber, though no one dared say it aloud. The Council convened emergency meetings. "Where is the Terran response?" a delegate asked, voice tight. "They have accepted the classification," another replied, but there was doubt in the tone. That doubt spread faster than any official notice. Slowly, one truth became clear. Humanity did not react as expected, because they had never been subordinate in the first place. They had only allowed the galaxy to believe it for a moment. Earth itself remained peaceful. Cities continued their quiet bustle. People went about their lives, unaware or perhaps knowingly ignoring the shockwaves their species had sent through the Council. In homes, offices, and universities, humans debated their own issues, unaware of how closely other species were watching. The contrast between this calm and the chaos rippling through the Council was almost surreal. The Council, in its growing panic, attempted to communicate again. Messages were sent, urgent and formal, demanding acknowledgement, demanding cooperation. But the humans' replies were brief and calm, sometimes as simple as a single word: acknowledged, nothing more. Every attempt to provoke a reaction failed. The Council began to realize they had underestimated the human approach entirely. Where other species might have panicked, lobbied, or protested, humans waited, observed, and responded with restraint. Behind the quiet of Earth's orbit, human fleets were not idle. Ships moved strategically, patrolling certain regions, quietly maintaining order in places that had been unstable for decades. These movements were precise, almost invisible, yet enough to ensure that humans could assert control without drawing attention. The galaxy had thought this silence meant submission, but it was preparation. The Council's delegates began to feel the first tremors of their mistake. Trade began to falter in subtle ways. Sectors dependent on human innovation suddenly encountered delays and inefficiencies. Systems maintained by humans, often taken for granted, now showed gaps. The more the Council panicked, the more they realized their mistake. Humanity was never subordinate. Their calmness, their patience, was not weakness. It was power, quiet and unyielding. Rumors started spreading among the species. They are holding back, some said. They will show us when they choose, others whispered. Fear mingled with awe. No species could predict what humans might do next. And unlike other civilizations, humans did not operate out of predictable patterns or honor rigid hierarchies. They made decisions on principle, logic, and circumstance, which made them, in many ways, untouchable. Meanwhile, Earth continued in its normal rhythm. Scientists debated theories, engineers developed new systems, and ordinary people went about their days without realizing the tension their species had caused across countless worlds. This normalcy itself was a strategy. The galaxy believed humans to be chaotic, reactive, and subordinate. But in reality, humans were calculating, patient, and deliberate. They had chosen silence as their first act of power. Within the council chambers, the unease became palpable. Long-standing members, veterans of countless galactic negotiations, admitted quietly to one another that the humans' behavior defied logic. How could a species so young, so untested in galactic politics, command such influence without raising a weapon or sending a fleet? The answer was simple yet terrifying. Humans had power in ways the Council could not fully measure, and they chose restraint over domination. In the weeks that followed, the Council's attempts to reassert control grew desperate. Delegates sent envoys, issued ultimatums, and attempted to manipulate other species to pressure Earth. Every effort failed. Every action was met with calm observation. Humans responded only when necessary, always measured, always deliberate, never reactive. They did not need to argue or fight. They were already winning. And through it all, humans remained human. There were no grandiose displays of power, no speeches about superiority. Instead, they simply went about their work, cared for their people, and waited. In this patience, the Council finally understood the magnitude of their error. They had underestimated humans entirely. The classification of subordinate species had been a mistake, a lapse of judgment that they would come to regret immediately. By the end of the first part of this story, the galaxy had begun to see the truth. Humans were not the species they thought they were. They were patient. They were observant. They were deliberate. And most importantly, they were not subordinate. They had merely chosen when and how to act. The silence of Earth was no surrender. It was a lesson in control, power, and foresight. And as the stars outside the council chambers twinkled coldly, the delegates realized that their declaration, intended to assert authority, had instead exposed their own vulnerability. Humanity was watching, and the galaxy, for the first time, truly feared what humans might do next. After the Council's declaration, the humans' response, or rather, the lack of it, sent shockwaves across the galaxy. Most species expected outrage, resistance, or at least a plea for reconsideration. What they got instead was silence. A silence so complete that it became almost unbearable in the council chambers. Weeks passed, and no messages came. No fleets moved aggressively. No protests were made. The council began to wonder if humanity had even heard them. Inside the Terran embassy, things were quiet, but far from idle. Humans moved with purpose, but in a calm, understated way. They held meetings, reviewed reports, and monitored communications across multiple sectors. They were aware of every ripple their silence caused. Earth's leaders understood exactly what they were doing. They were letting the galaxy make its assumptions, letting the other species feel in control while they quietly assessed the situation. For humans, patience was a weapon. It had always been so. Unlike other species in the Council, humans did not react impulsively or based on pride. They calculated, they waited, and they prepared. The silence was deliberate, a way to observe and understand without exposing weakness or inviting manipulation. Outsiders called it strange. Some called it cowardice. But in reality, it was power, wrapped in quiet restraint. As the weeks turned into months, other species began to feel the effects. The galaxy had become reliant on human technology, trade, and expertise. And now, with the humans holding back, cracks began to appear. Trade ships, accustomed to relying on Earth-built navigation systems, ran into delays. Communication relays maintained by human engineers began to falter in subtle ways. Medical nanites that kept entire populations healthy slowed their updates. The Council tried to remain confident, but unease was spreading quickly. Small problems turned into larger issues. In regions of space where human engineers had constructed monitoring stations, pirates and smugglers began to exploit weaknesses. Supply routes dependent on human logistics became unreliable. Other species scrambled to find replacements, but human systems had become so integrated, so advanced, that alternatives were slow, clumsy, and often ineffective. The Council had assumed that humanity's withdrawal was temporary, that their calm silence meant acceptance. They had been wrong. Within Earth's orbit, human fleets moved quietly, strategically, not in a display of aggression, but in a way that ensured stability in key regions. No alarms were raised. No messages broadcasted. Every movement was calculated, every patrol measured. To an outside observer, it might have looked like inaction, but in truth, humans were maintaining control while letting the Council believe they had the upper hand. Meanwhile, whispers spread throughout the Council chambers. Do they even care? One delegate asked nervously, "Why are they not reacting?" Another replied, "They are watching. That much is certain. But what are they planning?" Anxiety began to build. Species that had once considered humans to be primitive and unpredictable now feared their restraint. They could not understand it, and that made it dangerous. The Terran embassy issued a simple statement in response to the Council's inquiries. One sentence, acknowledged. It was polite, precise, and utterly calm. To the Council, it felt like a dismissal, a refusal to engage. They tried to interpret it as cooperation, but every experienced diplomat knew better. It was deliberate. It was human. And it was unsettling. As months passed, the subtle effects of humanity's calmness became more evident. Economic systems faltered in some sectors. Technologies developed by humans but relied upon by other species began showing flaws when human maintenance or oversight was removed. Entire regions experienced instability. The Council began to realize that their classification of humans as subordinate had consequences far beyond what they had anticipated. The humans' quiet withdrawal was changing the galaxy in ways that no one had predicted. Unlike other species, humans did not rush to fill gaps with aggression or protest. They simply paused, creating a void that others could not immediately fill. The Council had assumed that the humans' acceptance or apparent acceptance meant submission. But in reality, it was a strategic pause. Humans were letting others act first, revealing weaknesses and dependencies that had gone unnoticed. On Earth, the ordinary lives of humans continued almost unaffected. Cities thrived, scientists worked on new projects, families went about their daily routines. Humans themselves often seemed unaware of the tension they were creating across the galaxy. Yet every action taken, every system maintained, every fleet patrol calculated, was part of a larger understanding. Humans had a long memory and a keen sense of foresight. They did not need to react immediately because they already saw the patterns forming, the consequences unfolding. In the council, panic slowly began to spread. Long-serving delegates, those with decades or centuries of experience, admitted privately that they had underestimated humanity entirely. How could a species so young and seemingly unprepared command such quiet authority? The answer, when they realized it, was simple and terrifying. Humans did not need to dominate openly. Their power lay in restraint, patience, and intelligence. Every moment of inaction was a demonstration of control. Messages from the council grew more urgent. They sent envoys, they issued directives, they even attempted subtle threats. Humanity's response remained measured and calm. They answered only when necessary, and even then with precision. No panic, no emotional displays, no need to argue. Every response was carefully crafted, showing that humans understood the situation far better than anyone had assumed. Across multiple star systems, other species began to notice the shift. What had once been routine trade and communication now depended almost entirely on human support. Without it, they struggled. Panic and confusion spread, but humans remained silent, observing, waiting. It was as if Earth had taken a step back, allowing the galaxy to stumble forward, proving that the humans' patience and restraint had been the true foundation of stability all along. Meanwhile, on Earth, discussions continued, quietly and without urgency. Humans debated logistics, trade, and diplomacy, but always in a calm, methodical way. They knew that the galaxy believed them to be reactive and subordinate. That misunderstanding was powerful. By doing nothing aggressively, they allowed others to reveal weaknesses, make mistakes, and expose dependencies. The Council's fear grew with each passing day. Species that had once mocked humans now whispered about them in private chambers, expressing concern and even awe. "They are not what we thought," one delegate admitted. "They're calm. Their patience. It is a power we cannot measure, and perhaps we never will." Even as humans continued their quiet routines, the galaxy was changing. Supply chains had slowed. Pirates and opportunists tested the limits of security, and sectors dependent on human technology realized how vulnerable they had become. The Council, for the first time, understood the consequences of their declaration. It had not forced humans into submission. It had revealed how deeply the galaxy relied on them, and how dangerous it was to underestimate them. By the end of these months, one undeniable fact had emerged. Humanity's calmness was not weakness. It was deliberate, strategic, and infinitely powerful. They were observing, analyzing, and allowing the galaxy to reveal itself. Every action the Council had taken, every assumption about human behavior, had been a mistake. And as they realized it, a quiet fear settled over the chamber. Humans were watching, yes, but they were also learning. And in this patient silence, the galaxy was being forced to understand that the humans were far from subordinate. The first real lesson had been taught. The humans did not need to fight to assert their influence. They did not need fleets in motion or weapons fired. Their restraint, their calm, and their silence were enough. The Council's declaration had been intended to control, but it had done the opposite. It had revealed the truth. Humans were not subordinate. They had chosen to wait, to observe, and to demonstrate that real power was often hidden in patience, in foresight, and in the ability to remain calm when others lost their composure. By the end of Part 2, the galaxy had learned something it would never forget. Humanity was not reckless, but it was not weak. The silence, which had seemed strange and unsettling at first, was in fact the first sign of true human strength. The Council had assumed that declaring humans subordinate would place them firmly under control. Instead, it had set the stage for a lesson in patience, power, and quiet authority, a lesson that was just beginning. As time went on, the effects of humanity's quiet restraint began to ripple across the galaxy in ways that the Council had never imagined. What had seemed like a calm pause now became a series of noticeable disruptions. Systems that relied heavily on human technology began to falter, sometimes in small ways, sometimes in ways that threatened entire sectors. The Council had assumed that humans would respond aggressively, or at least attempt to negotiate. But the absence of any such behavior only made other species increasingly uneasy. Trade was one of the first areas to feel the impact. Humans had developed highly efficient transport networks and supply chains that were widely used by other species. Ships that relied on Terran navigation systems began to experience delays. Delivery schedules slipped, contracts were delayed, and disputes arose where there had never been problems before. It was subtle at first, almost unnoticeable, but over time, these delays began to affect economies in multiple systems. The Council attempted to intervene, sending messages and urgent requests to the humans, but their replies were always calm, minimal, and polite. Acknowledged, they said. Nothing more. In addition to trade, human-built communication networks began to show signs of strain. Relays that had previously functioned flawlessly started experiencing interruptions. Some systems even temporarily went offline. Delegates who had once considered humans young and inexperienced now realized how dependent the galaxy had become on their technology. Panic quietly spread among the more technologically dependent species. The Council had assumed humanity's silence meant weakness. But now, in these small failures and interruptions, the truth became clear. Humans had been the foundation of stability, and removing even a small part of their involvement caused chaos. It wasn't only technology and trade that were affected. Human influence extended into security and logistics. In certain regions, human fleets had quietly maintained order for decades. Patrols were precise, systems were monitored carefully, and conflicts were prevented before they could escalate. Now, with humans deliberately holding back, minor disturbances began to grow. Pirates and smugglers tested the limits of security, moving where human presence had been minimal. Local governments struggled to respond. Entire sectors felt the subtle pressure of absence. Despite these disruptions, humanity on Earth remained calm. Life continued in its usual rhythm, scientists working on experiments, engineers improving systems, families going about their daily lives. The galaxy assumed humans were unaware of the consequences of their pause, but in reality, they were fully aware. Every ripple in trade, every lapse in security, every malfunction in technology was being noted and understood. Humans were watching, learning, and recording. Their silence was not ignorance. It was deliberate observation. Within the Council, the anxiety grew. Delegates who had once viewed humanity as manageable now admitted privately that they had made a grave mistake. "We assumed submission," one delegate said in a quiet conversation. "We assumed that their silence was weakness. But it is not. It is control." The admission spread slowly through the chambers. Fear began to mix with respect, and the sense of being outmaneuvered became palpable. The Council attempted more direct measures to regain influence. Envoys were sent to Earth, fleets moved closer to human-controlled sectors, and messages were drafted to apply pressure. Yet all these efforts were met with the same calm, measured responses. Humanity replied only when necessary, always politely, always deliberately. There was no panic, no emotional reaction, no aggression. Their restraint itself was becoming a tool of power, demonstrating a control that the Council could not easily counter. Even as the Council grew uneasy, humans remained human. They were not showing off their abilities, nor were they demonstrating dominance. Their power was subtle, practical, and invisible. It came from patience, strategy, and foresight. While the galaxy scrambled to manage the absence of human involvement, humans quietly ensured that nothing spiraled completely out of control. They acted when necessary, but they acted on their terms, in their time, and in ways that made it clear that they had always been in control, even when others believed they were subordinate. Across different star systems, other species began to notice the shift. Economies faltered, fleets became overextended, communication networks were strained, and supply chains slowed. The more the galaxy tried to fill the gaps left by humans, the more they realized just how integrated and essential human systems had become. It was not a sudden takeover, nor was it an aggressive move. It was simply a quiet withdrawal, a demonstration of how critical humans had been all along. Inside Earth's orbit, human fleets moved strategically. Their patrols were minimal but effective, designed to prevent catastrophic breakdowns rather than enforce control. Engineers maintained key infrastructure, ensuring stability where it mattered most. Every decision was precise and intentional. The galaxy assumed humans were being passive, but in truth, their restraint had become a form of influence far greater than the Council had ever anticipated. Meanwhile, life on Earth continued with normalcy that seemed almost ordinary to outsiders. People worked, studied, traveled, and pursued daily routines as though nothing significant had changed. Yet beneath the surface, humans were fully aware of the impact their silence and restraint were causing across multiple systems. They understood the ripple effects of their actions, and their calm observation allowed them to remain several steps ahead of any crisis that might arise. The Council's realization slowly solidified. Humans were not subordinate. The classification had been made without understanding the depth of humanity's influence or the subtleties of their strategy. The silence that had been mistaken for submission was actually a form of power. Humans did not need to assert dominance through aggression or negotiation. Their patience and calculated restraint allowed them to control events without anyone fully noticing. Rumors began to circulate throughout the council chambers. Some delegates whispered of human cunning, others of human foresight. "They are always watching," one said. "They understand far more than we assume." Our declaration did not humble them. It revealed how much we rely on them. Anxiety grew because even as the galaxy scrambled to adapt, humans acted on their own terms, not in response to pressure or threats. Their restraint was a quiet challenge, a subtle reminder that real power was measured not by immediate reaction, but by the ability to control outcomes over time. As the weeks continued, more evidence of human influence emerged. In regions where human engineers had built infrastructure, minor failures began to occur, testing the skills of local species. In some areas, security networks faltered, and opportunists tried to exploit gaps. Trade routes slowed, and sectors dependent on human logistics struggled. The Council began to understand that their declaration had consequences far beyond what they had anticipated. Humanity's calm withdrawal was changing the galaxy, revealing vulnerabilities that no one had noticed before. On Earth, the humans continued their quiet, methodical routines. Life was ordinary, yet purposeful. Scientists tested new technologies, engineers monitored systems, and fleets patrolled sectors without fanfare. Humans did not need to make grand displays of power. Their influence was quiet, subtle, and undeniable. Every action, every pause, every calculated decision demonstrated a mastery of strategy that other species could only watch in awe. The Council's panic grew as they realized the full extent of their mistake. Delegates admitted that they had underestimated humans entirely. A young, chaotic, unpredictable species had become essential, and their restraint had created a situation that the galaxy could not easily manage. Fear, respect, and a sense of being outmaneuvered dominated the chambers. The Council had assumed that declaring humans subordinate would place them under control. Instead, it exposed their own dependence and the true power of humanity. By the end of this part, one fact had become undeniable. Humans were not subordinate. They were patient, deliberate, and observant. Their quiet withdrawal, which had been misunderstood as weakness, was actually a demonstration of incredible strategic power. The Council had learned, too late, that humans did not need to react aggressively to assert control. Their calmness, foresight, and ability to influence events without interference had shown the galaxy that real power did not always shout. It could be measured in silence, patience, and careful observation. Humanity's lesson was clear. They could withdraw, remain calm, and allow the galaxy to reveal its own weaknesses. The Council's declaration of subordination had not humbled humans. It had simply highlighted the gap between assumption and reality. Humans were watching, learning, and waiting, demonstrating that true strength often lay in restraint. And the galaxy, for the first time, began to understand that what they had thought was submission was in fact a quiet mastery far beyond their comprehension. The months of silence from humanity were no longer subtle. Across the galaxy, other species began to feel the full weight of what the Council had underestimated. Systems that had relied on human technology and oversight were now struggling. Trade routes slowed to a crawl. Fleets that had depended on human logistical support were delayed, and minor conflicts flared in regions that humans had once quietly monitored. The absence of active human participation was not chaotic, but it exposed vulnerabilities that no one had noticed before. The Council began to panic. Messages were sent urgently, envoys dispatched, fleets repositioned, and directives issued in haste. Nothing seemed to change the humans' behavior. They responded politely when necessary, but always in a controlled, minimal way. The single-word replies, the brief acknowledgments, and the calm maintenance of essential systems frustrated and unnerved the Council. It became clear that the humans were not reacting to the Council's pressure. They were acting on their own terms, in their own time. Trade systems began showing cracks that could no longer be ignored. Supply chains stretched thin, delays turned into shortages, and entire economies felt the strain. Species who had taken human innovation for granted suddenly realized how deeply dependent they were. Ships carrying critical resources were held up because navigation systems needed human updates. Medical systems that relied on Terran nanotechnology experienced temporary failures. Even minor infrastructure issues cascaded into larger problems because humans had quietly maintained much of the galaxy's essential systems. Human fleets, meanwhile, remained calm and precise. They did not launch attacks. They did not blockade regions. They did not show dominance. Instead, they patrolled key areas strategically, ensuring that no sector descended into complete chaos. Their presence was subtle, almost invisible, yet effective. The galaxy assumed humans were being passive or indifferent, but in reality, they were quietly maintaining balance while the Council scrambled to fix the problems that had arisen from their withdrawal. Inside the Council chambers, the tension became palpable. Delegates who had once considered humans a young and chaotic species now admitted privately that they had misjudged them completely. Fear and respect began to intertwine. We assumed that their silence was submission. One elder delegate whispered to another, "We were wrong. Every moment they do nothing, the consequences reveal their control." Even those who had once been outspoken critics of humans were beginning to acknowledge the truth. Humanity's restraint was not weakness, it was strategy. Humanity's calm observation allowed them to learn more about the galaxy than any other species. Every ripple of panic, every failure in supply or communication, every desperate attempt by other species to fill the gaps revealed how dependent the galaxy had become on human systems. While the Council focused on trying to assert control, humans were quietly understanding the full extent of influence they had always held. Their silence became a lesson in observation, strategy, and patient assessment. Back on Earth, life continued in a normal rhythm. Cities bustled with people. Scientists worked on new technologies. Engineers monitored key systems, and human fleets maintained quiet patrols. To outsiders, it appeared as if nothing had changed. To the humans themselves, every action, every calculation, and every observation was deliberate. They understood exactly what the Council had assumed, and they let the other species' mistakes reveal the gaps in galactic dependence. As the weeks passed, the Council tried increasingly desperate measures. Envoys were sent with threats, fleets were positioned to intimidate, and messages were drafted with urgency. Yet humans never overreacted. They responded only as needed, calmly, politely, and always strategically. Their restraint became a form of power. The galaxy had assumed that dominance required action or aggression. But humans demonstrated that the ability to wait, observe, and intervene only when necessary could be far more effective. The ripple effects continued to expand. Trade hubs dependent on human navigation and logistics experienced delays, and smaller species struggled to adapt. Security networks faltered, and criminal activity began to increase in regions that had once been stabilized by human presence. These were not catastrophic failures, but the subtle shifts were enough to make the Council realize that humans were far more essential than anyone had previously admitted. The classification of humans as subordinate now appeared foolish in hindsight. Humans themselves remained steady and practical. They were not motivated by revenge or anger. They did not need to assert power through dominance or violence. Instead, their quiet, patient observation allowed them to control events indirectly. Every adjustment, every patrol, every minimal intervention was calculated. Their strategy relied on understanding, foresight, and restraint. The galaxy assumed they were passive. In reality, they were quietly shaping events to highlight the dependence others had on them. Across the council chambers, delegates whispered about the humans' cunning and patience. "They are watching everything," one remarked. "Every time we act, they learn. Every time we panic, they gain understanding." Fear mingled with awe. Humanity had demonstrated that true strength was not always visible. It could be measured in patience, in quiet observation, and in the ability to act only when necessary. The more the Council tried to assert control, the more dependent the galaxy revealed itself to be, even as humans quietly influenced the stability of multiple systems. Life on Earth continued as normal. People worked, traveled, studied, and lived their everyday lives without knowing the full extent of the galaxy's reliance on them. It was not arrogance or detachment that allowed them to maintain calm. It was strategy, intelligence, and understanding. Humans had learned the value of observation over reaction, patience over impulsive action, and subtle influence over overt control. The Council finally began to see the consequences of their earlier declaration. Systems failed, trade faltered, security gaps widened, and communication networks strained. Every attempt to force humanity into compliance failed. The single-word responses, the brief acknowledgments, and the calm maintenance of essential systems frustrated them. Humanity's silence had turned into an invisible power, one that demonstrated control far more effectively than any overt action could have done. Rumors and private discussions within the Council revealed a growing realization: humans were not subordinate. Their calm withdrawal was not weakness. It was a demonstration of strength. Their patience, their foresight, and their ability to act only when necessary had shown the galaxy that power did not always need to be visible to be effective. The Council had underestimated humanity, and in doing so, exposed its own dependence on them. The longer the humans waited, the more the galaxy struggled to adapt. Systems that relied on Terran expertise faltered. Security that depended on human oversight weakened. Trade that relied on human logistics slowed. And yet, humans themselves remained steady, calm, and deliberate. Their influence was undeniable, even as it remained subtle. They had turned patience into a tool, restraint into power, and observation into control. By the end of this part, one truth had become clear. Humanity had never been subordinate. The Council's declaration had been a mistake, a misjudgment that had underestimated the subtle strength of humans. Through calm observation, quiet intervention, and deliberate patience, humans demonstrated that real power was measured not by immediate reaction or aggression, but by the ability to maintain control without being noticed. The galaxy had learned a lesson it would not soon forget. Humans had shown that influence did not always need to be forceful. Sometimes the greatest power lay in quiet patience, careful observation, and subtle action. The Council had assumed dominance required declarations and commands, but humans demonstrated that real authority could exist quietly, invisibly, and effectively. And as the Council realized the full extent of their error, they understood that humanity had already taught them a lesson in strategy, patience, and restraint that would shape the galaxy for years to come. As the months of calm observation stretched on, the Council began to feel the true weight of their mistake. Systems across the galaxy that had relied on human technology and oversight were now struggling in subtle, but increasingly serious ways. Trade routes that humans had quietly maintained experienced delays. Supply chains that had seemed unbreakable faltered. Communication relays that had functioned flawlessly under human supervision began to show interruptions. It was clear that the galaxy had relied far more on humanity than anyone had realized, and the Council's declaration of subordination had only revealed their own dependence. The humans, however, did not panic. Life on Earth continued normally. Cities thrived. Families went about their daily routines. Scientists worked on new discoveries, and engineers quietly maintained essential systems. From the perspective of the galaxy, it might have seemed like humanity was indifferent or detached. But every action they took, every decision they made, was deliberate and calculated. Humans were observing the consequences of the Council's decisions, quietly analyzing, and waiting for the right moment to act, even as minor disruptions spread through trade, communication, and security networks. Human fleets continued to operate with precision. Their patrols were quiet, measured, and strategic. They did not strike in anger or assert dominance. Instead, they ensured stability where it mattered most, allowing the galaxy to feel the consequences of humanity's withdrawal without plunging into complete chaos. Their calm, deliberate actions were teaching the galaxy a lesson. True power often lies in restraint. In the Council chambers, fear and confusion grew. Delegates who had once considered humans unpredictable and chaotic now realized that they had completely misjudged them. One elder delegate whispered to another, "We thought silence meant submission. We were wrong. Every delay, every disruption reveals their control." Discussions became more urgent, yet every step taken by the Council only highlighted their reliance on humans. Every attempt to pressure or negotiate was met with measured, polite responses that refused to reveal any sense of desperation. Humans were not trying to dominate. They were not trying to punish. They were simply asserting influence in the quietest, most effective way possible. By allowing other species to confront the consequences of their dependence, humans were demonstrating the subtle power of foresight, patience, and strategic restraint. The galaxy assumed that action equaled power. Humans proved otherwise. As weeks turned into months, more evidence of human influence became undeniable. Regions that had relied on terrain logistics experienced delays, forcing local species to scramble. Security networks that depended on human oversight became vulnerable. Trade that had been considered routine slowed or halted entirely in some sectors. The more the Council tried to assert control, the more apparent it became that humans had always been quietly maintaining balance across the galaxy. On Earth, humans went about their daily lives with a calm focus that seemed almost ordinary to outsiders. People worked, learned, traveled, and lived in ways that appeared mundane. Yet every observation, every action, and every calculation contributed to a greater understanding of the galaxy and its dependencies. Humans had learned the value of patience, careful observation, and subtle influence over overt control. They did not need to react aggressively to assert authority. Their restraint itself had become a tool of power. The Council, increasingly desperate, tried new strategies. Envoys were sent with messages of urgency, fleets were repositioned to intimidate, and commands were issued to force compliance. But humanity responded only when necessary, calmly and with precision. Their responses were never rushed or emotional. They acknowledged messages, maintained essential operations, and let the galaxy experience the consequences of its own reliance on them. Every move was deliberate, a demonstration that restraint could be more powerful than force. Whispers within the Council grew louder. "They are always observing," one delegate said. "They understand far more than we imagined. Every time we act in panic, they gain understanding." The realization spread slowly, but steadily. Humans had never been subordinate. Their calm, measured approach allowed them to observe the galaxy, understand its weaknesses, and maintain control without appearing to act at all. The Council had assumed submission. They had discovered mastery. As the months continued, the subtle effects of humanity's quiet withdrawal became impossible to ignore. Trade delays became shortages. Security gaps were exploited. Communication disruptions affected multiple systems. Humans, however, remained calm. They acted only where necessary, carefully maintaining stability without forcing attention upon themselves. Their influence was invisible yet undeniable. The galaxy was learning the lesson of human power. True authority could exist quietly, patiently, and without grand displays. Life on Earth mirrored this quiet mastery. People continued ordinary routines, unaware of or indifferent to the chaos they were quietly managing across the stars. Scientists experimented, engineers maintained critical systems, and fleets patrolled strategically. Every decision was deliberate, every action calculated. Humans did not need to demonstrate dominance openly. Their restraint, observation, and careful intervention were enough to shape the galaxy in ways that the Council had never imagined. The Council's panic reached new levels. Delegates admitted privately that they had underestimated humanity completely. A species that had once seemed young, chaotic, and unpredictable was now revealed to be patient, observant, and strategically powerful. Every attempt to control, pressure, or manipulate humanity failed. Every intervention, every directive, only highlighted the galaxy's reliance on human systems. The Council had declared humans subordinate, but in truth, it had been their own dependency that was exposed. Humanity's approach was not aggressive or domineering. It was strategic, deliberate, and human. By choosing to act only when necessary, by observing and analyzing the consequences of the Council's actions, humans had turned patience into a weapon and restraint into power. The Council's assumptions had been entirely incorrect. Silence had proven far more effective than confrontation. Restraint had shown more strength than aggression. Across the galaxy, whispers of human foresight and influence spread. Other species began to realize that humans had quietly maintained stability across systems they themselves had taken for granted. Every disruption highlighted how reliant the galaxy had been on Terran technology, logistics, and oversight. Humanity had never needed to assert dominance openly. Their calm, measured actions, combined with patient observation, were enough to ensure that the Council and all other species recognized their essential role. By the end of this period, one truth had become clear: humans were not subordinate. Their calm withdrawal had exposed the full extent of the galaxy's dependence on them. The Council's declaration, intended to assert control, had instead highlighted humanity's quiet mastery. Humans had demonstrated that real power did not need to shout or dominate. It could exist in restraint, in patience, and in the ability to observe and act only when necessary. Humans had proven that influence did not need to be violent or aggressive. Sometimes, the greatest power lay in watching, waiting, and allowing the galaxy to reveal its own weaknesses. The Council's error had been to assume that humans would react impulsively. Instead, humanity had demonstrated that control could be exerted subtly, without fanfare, and with profound effect. The galaxy had learned a lesson it would not forget, that real power could exist in silence, in patience, and in the strategic restraint of a species that understood its own strength. Through careful observation, deliberate action, and quiet restraint, humans had turned the Council's declaration into an opportunity. The galaxy had assumed submission. Humans had revealed control. They had proven that strength was not measured in aggression or noise, but in patience, foresight, and the ability to maintain influence without drawing attention. The Council's mistake had become humanity's quiet victory, a lesson in strategy that would shape galactic relations for decades to come. The Council's realization had finally reached its peak. Every system that had once relied on human support, guidance, and oversight was now struggling. Trade delays, minor security breaches, and communication disruptions were spreading like ripples across the galaxy. The Council, which had once assumed that humans could be easily controlled or forced into submission, now understood that they had made a mistake of unimaginable proportions. Humans had never been subordinate. They had merely chosen to act on their own terms, quietly observing, calmly responding, and ensuring stability where it truly mattered. On Earth, life continued as normal. Cities bustled, children learned, scientists experimented, engineers monitored key systems, and fleets maintained precise, quiet patrols. Humans were fully aware of the Council's panic, the whispers, and the growing concern across multiple sectors, but they did not respond in anger or arrogance. They acted as humans always had measured, deliberate, and strategic. To the galaxy, it may have seemed as if nothing was happening, but in reality, every action taken, every calculation made, and every observation recorded reinforced humanity's quiet mastery of the situation. The Council tried again, perhaps for the last time, to assert control. Messages were drafted, envoys were sent, and fleets were positioned in ways intended to intimidate. They assumed that the humans' patience had limits, and that eventually they would act under pressure. But the humans responded only when necessary, always politely, never emotionally, and always on their own terms. Their calm responses, combined with their careful maintenance of critical systems, revealed a truth that no Council member could ignore. Patience, observation, and restraint could be far more powerful than aggression. As weeks passed, the full impact of humanity's quiet withdrawal became impossible to ignore. Systems faltered, trade routes slowed, and security gaps appeared. Yet in all of this, humans were never absent. They were always observing, always calculating, always maintaining stability where it mattered most. They had turned patience into a weapon and restraint into power. The galaxy assumed that dominance required action or aggression, but humans demonstrated otherwise. Private conversations in the Council chambers revealed growing panic and awe. Delegates admitted that they had underestimated humans completely. "We assumed they would panic or argue," one whispered. "We assumed they would fight to assert their place." But they waited. They observed. And in their silence, they revealed our dependence. The realization spread slowly but steadily. Humanity's calm had become a form of power, one that the galaxy could neither fully predict nor counter. Humans did not act to punish the Council. They did not need to demonstrate power through threats or displays. Instead, they chose subtle interventions that maintained stability, ensured continuity, and highlighted the galaxy's reliance on their systems. Their influence was invisible, yet undeniable. Every delay, every minor disruption, and every careful response was a lesson in strategy and restraint. The Council had assumed submission, but they had witnessed mastery. Across star systems, whispers about human strategy and influence began to spread. Other species began to realize that humans had quietly maintained stability in regions they had taken for granted. Economies faltered, fleets became overextended, and communication networks strained. The longer humans waited, the more the galaxy struggled. And yet, humans themselves remained calm, methodical, and deliberate. They acted only when necessary, and always with a clear purpose. The Council's panic deepened as they recognized the consequences of their earlier declaration. They had assumed that classifying humans as subordinate would allow them to control them. Instead, it had revealed their own vulnerability and dependence. Every action taken to pressure humanity was met with a measured response. Every attempt to negotiate or intimidate was quietly absorbed and countered with restraint. Humans had turned patience and observation into their greatest advantage. On Earth, humans continued their daily lives as though nothing had changed. People worked, learned, traveled, and lived ordinary lives. And yet, every ordinary action had meaning. Scientists experimenting with new technologies, engineers monitoring critical systems, and fleets patrolling key sectors were all part of a larger strategy. Humans understood their influence and used it subtly, quietly shaping the galaxy while allowing others to believe they were in control. The Council finally acknowledged a difficult truth. Humans had never been subordinate, and they had never needed to assert dominance to demonstrate control. Their restraint, patience, and careful observation had revealed weaknesses, dependencies, and vulnerabilities across the galaxy that no one had noticed before. Humanity had quietly demonstrated that real power did not need to be visible to be effective. The longer humans remained calm, the more the galaxy learned its lesson. Trade systems, security networks, and communication relays all depended on Terran oversight more than anyone had realized. Attempts to replace or replicate human systems failed or proved inadequate. The Council's earlier assumptions about submission were shattered. Humans had taught them that influence could exist quietly, without threat, without arrogance, and without aggression. Meanwhile, humans themselves remained focused on what mattered most: observation, calculation, and strategic intervention only when necessary. They did not act for recognition, reward, or dominance. Instead, they acted to maintain balance, stability, and long-term planning. Every action was deliberate, ensuring that the galaxy would not collapse while highlighting the dependence that other species had on humanity. The Council, now deeply humbled, began to approach humanity with genuine respect and caution. Envoys were sent not to command, but to request guidance. Fleets were positioned not to intimidate, but to observe and learn. Messages were written not as ultimatums, but as appeals. Even with these changes, the humans responded in the same calm, deliberate manner that had defined their strategy from the beginning. Their restraint had become their greatest statement, teaching the galaxy a lesson in patience, foresight, and influence. The ripple effects continued. Minor disruptions became opportunities for learning. Trade and communication delays forced other species to innovate, but always with the realization that humans had quietly been the foundation of stability. Fleets and security systems adjusted in response to gaps that only humans could fully manage. Across the galaxy, respect for humanity grew alongside a deep, cautious fear. They had demonstrated that control could exist quietly, invisibly, and effectively. Humanity's patience had created a lesson no one would soon forget. By waiting, observing, and acting only when necessary, humans had exposed weaknesses in the Council's assumptions, in the galaxy's systems, and in the understanding of influence itself. They had demonstrated that real power did not need to be shouted or displayed. It could exist quietly, strategically, and effectively. The Council's error in declaring humans subordinate had only highlighted humanity's mastery. Back on Earth, life continued normally, but the humans were fully aware of the galaxy's growing respect and cautious fear. Every scientist, every engineer, every fleet commander understood the subtle power of observation, restraint, and careful action. Humans had turned what might have seemed like ordinary life into a platform for quiet strategy, ensuring that the galaxy would always recognize their influence, without ever needing to dominate overtly. By the end of this period, one undeniable truth had emerged: humans were never subordinate. The Council's declaration, intended to control and assert dominance, had only revealed humanity's strategic mastery. Through patience, observation, and subtle intervention, humans had quietly maintained stability across the galaxy, demonstrated their influence, and taught a lesson that would resonate for generations. The galaxy had learned that true power could exist without aggression, without arrogance, and without overt display. It could exist in patience, in careful observation, and in the ability to act decisively only when necessary. Humans had taught the Council, and every species watching, that influence did not need to be forceful to be effective. It could be quiet, calm, and deliberate, and that, in itself, was enough to command respect. The Council, humbled and cautious, finally approached humanity with genuine acknowledgement of their error. Humans, in their measured way, responded not with anger or revenge, but with guidance, cooperation, and subtle leadership. They had shown that restraint was not weakness, that patience was not indecision, and that influence did not always need to shout to be heard. Humanity had quietly rewritten the rules of engagement for the galaxy. Through calm observation, strategic restraint, and careful action, they had demonstrated a form of power that no one had anticipated. The Council had assumed submission and learned mastery. The galaxy had assumed chaos and found order. And through it all, humans remained exactly as they had always been: human. Deliberate, patient, and quietly powerful. By the end of this story, the lesson was clear. The greatest strength often lies in patience, restraint, and strategic observation. Humans had shown that true influence could exist without domination, that real authority could be exercised without aggression, and that power could be demonstrated in silence. The galaxy would never forget the quiet mastery of humanity,